cell phone.
Yeah.
I think
He said he was going to try from his phone.
Can you hear us? He looks very excited.
Oh my God!
Yay!
It's a miracle!
Yay!
Yay!
But now I've lost you all. I don't know where you are.
Don't worry about it. We can see you.
Fuck
We can
it, you
hear
can hear
you.
us.
If you can hear us, it's all
we
good.
can see you. We can hear you.
I think your computer's haunted, man.
It is haunted.
Someone
What's the next
tried
book?
that. The next Grady Hendrix book, the sequel to the last one.
Yeah. How to sell a haunted computer.
Yeah. Hello, welcome back. That was a long break. It's about a little over 3 months, and we ended on episode 204. It's called Rising Together. Me, Candace, Paul Tremblay, Sarah Langan, John Langan, Victor Laval, and Livia Llewellyn, and Larry Barron. We all got together, and now we are coming back to episode 205, where a panel that we've been really pumped for. It's called Down Under because we are focused on authors based or born in Australia. And we got Alan Baxter. He and I have been talking about this for probably 2 or 3 years now. Alan, you're required to be here once a season. How are you?
I'm good. We finally got it organized. We're finally here.
Yes,
What you just said about the last episode, that's a hell of an episode to follow, isn't it? Tremblay, Langan, oh my God.
You guys are awesome too. I'm sorry, I skipped my say hello to my co-hosts, my fellow hosts, my friends. Brennan LaFaro, say hello, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
Say hello, Candace Nola.
Hello, everyone.
The other panelists are Kaaron Warren. Say hello, Kaaron.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here.
Jay Ashley Smith.
Hello there.
Anthony O'Connor.
G'day, legends.
and Aaron Dries. Say hello, Aaron.
Hello, Aaron. Good to see you all.
Oh my God.
Obligatory.
Opening toy. Love to see it. Love to see it.
Ready? Are you ready? If we're going to do a down under panel, I think it's really important that for the benefit of international listeners, Australians describe what a DAG is, a DAG tag.
Yeah.
Does
this translate to anyone not born in Australia? Do you know what a DAG is?
I didn't know until I got here.
No.
Okay.
I knew from watching Neighbours in the UK.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah.
I still didn't quite know really what it meant, and I didn't realize where it came from, which is genuinely gross.
Yeah.
Now I'm
So
really confused.
Hello, Aaron.
Yeah.
Are you not going to tell us? Or
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. So scientifically, a DAG is a piece of like sheep shit that forms in the coagulated kind of fur at the end of a sheep's asshole. That's a DAG, like those little balls of like frosty shit that kind of build. That's a DAG.
my
But
God, how did we get here so quickly?
Yeah.
It's been
but-
2 minutes.
Take that, Paul Tremblay. He ain't
The
top of this
Australians
shit.
lower that tone with
like
very
Lagan ain't
high
talking
level.
about the shit. But what happens is that, so basically to call somebody a DAG in Australia is actually kind of a term of endearment because we're kind of like, it's
Really?
like,
Totally.
Get the fuck out of here. Are you
Oh.
kidding me?
It is.
It is. To self-identify as a DAG means that I'm like, I tell like the really bad jokes, I wear those, the odd socks. It's kind of that slightly, and I would think of my best friend, all my best friends are DAGs. That'll be the title of my memoir one day. So that's
Sunsets consciously, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I shit you not. If
Affable
you
dork,
wrote,
like a pleasant, affable dork kind of thing.
if you wrote,
Yeah, that's right.
exactly.
Ellen, in Rue, your book Rue, at the beginning or end, I forget. I think it's the end now. You have you have Australian phrases or terms like
Yeah, there's a
that.
glossary. Yeah,
If you wrote a book size of that and illustrated and wrote some funny stories, I guarantee that shit would sell. I'd buy it. A DAG.
yeah.
He wrote notes.
I actually ended up copying that page onto my website somewhere. I've been fixing my website, but I need to fix up. So I've been working on it and building it into a bigger page. It's like a full Australian glossary as a page on my site. So I'll have to figure out where I put it and tidy it up and I'll make sure DAGs included literal and colloquial meanings.
Anthony's got a fantastic glossary in his book, by the way. I don't know if you others have seen that. I love your one.
Yes,
It's actually just the most brilliant comic work of anything I've seen in a long time. Absolutely brilliant.
Well, the
New
whole
words,
book's kind
old
of in this
words.
kind of fractured future Australian dystopian dialect. So, I've managed to confuse lots of Americans and Poms. Who are
No,
people
no, no.
from the UK.
Let's back up, Anthony. Talk about that. This is about Down Under. Look, you guys just topped every single thing that we tried to come up with for an introduction. So, Anthony, we're talking about you now. Tell us all about it for those that aren't familiar with what book you're talking about.
Oh yeah, it's Straya. By me. It's kind of like I guess the elevator pitch would be it's Mad Max meets The Thing in terms of the story, but it's set in a kind of futuristic Australia that's dystopian as fuck, and everything's destroyed, and everyone speaks in this kind of fractured, broken mixture of Australian colloquialisms and guttural speak. Very similar to Australia in modern life, to be honest, but just more monsters in this one. And so I had a lot of fun kind of playing with the Australian vernacular, which is this fascinating, brutal poetry of sweary slang nonsense, which is it's just wonderful to behold. It really is a beautiful language because of how ugly and gross and coarse it is. And I mind that for a lot of fun.
So that's kind of like Anthony Burgess's 1962 novel, A Clockwork Orange.
Absolutely correct.
I love that one. It's just, what's happening, and just like you said, he basically fluffs up brutality, but it's so weird. It's such a weird juxtaposition.
And the first 5 pages are like, I have no idea what's going on, which is probably a lot of people's experience with Australia, but like 5 pages in, you suddenly get it, and it clicks, and it becomes part of it.
It's like reading Shakespeare or something like that,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's cohesive, but it takes you a while to zone in and lock into it. And so you just had that commitment for, like you said, first 5 pages, bit of commitment or something, then you zone in.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It makes me think of your book. Made me think of Ridley Walker as well as the other connective work. I think with that same sort of new old language mix, and it takes you a little while to realise what places he's talking about, that sort of thing. So I love that sort of slow recognition of the sort of places that you're talking about in this New Sydney and New Australia.
That's actually pretty intelligent to come up with a history of language. But I wanted to say, don't skip the biggest brag about that book. But Tom Savini blurbed it. That's
man.
That's insane. That's so cool, man. Like, he's one of the coolest guys in horror film.
Oh yeah, I mean he did the special effects for Dawn of the Dead and Friday the 13th. Like, he's the maestro of mayhem.
And it was him and George. George Romero.
That double team that brought us the greatest zombie films of all time. He actually did the special makeup effects on a film I wrote called Red Ink. It's known as Inhuman Resources in the States. I think it's on HBO, I think. And we sort of got friendly after that. And he has an Australian wife who is a friend of mine, Jodie. And he loves Australian vernacular. Like, he loves coming here. He comes here and learns all the way we speak and is fascinated by. Apparently, we say yeah all the time. Like, he's like, you guys always say yeah. And I'm like, yeah. Apparently, that's the thing we do. And he was nice enough to read it and give lovely comments. And he actually gave comments on both my books. So he's just a real gem, a real legend, actually.
And then, real quick, mention what that new book is. Again, you have just an insanely cool cover.
Oh, thanks, man. The latest one is Emma After, which is kind of like a cozy, I guess, Beetlejuicy type of ghost story. Set in the Australian, sort of rural Australia again, but just with regular person English this time, not with the whole vernacular thing.
And since we talked about film a little bit, Aaron, I'm not saying talk about your film exactly, but like the last 2 years, give or take, for you has been pretty insane. And if there's anything you can talk about,
there's not much. There's not much that I can talk about other than to say that I've got my fingers in a number of cinema pies, and none of them are completely baked yet. And these things are, but 2 are incredibly close. One of which is really close, and I got edits back from the producer for another pass on that screenplay just this morning. So we'll see what happened. Maybe next time we catch up, I can tell you something more concrete, other than to say that my writing fiction has been a lot slower over the last year and a half because I've been writing screenplays at a very quick clip, honestly. And hopefully something gets made soon. But there's things I can't say yet, but it was so close.
That's awesome. And I'll just say a big brag for you too, Mick Garris. He's just his past, like Hocus Pocus alone is amazing, but his past and his filmography is just unreal. It's like big hit after big hit. And
he's incredibly generous too. Like he's incredibly generous. It was very, very humbling for him to do the introduction to Cut to Care. It was a really touching thing. And he is like, if anyone ever is over in LA and kind of even peripherally dipping their toes in the horror cinema scene over there, everyone talks of Mick as being kind of the connective tissue between so many different factions, from writers to directors to special effects people to actors and everything. He's just a very generous guy and genuine. So I was so super happy that he said yes to that.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. And now I want to go to J. Ashley Smith, talk about your new book as much as you want, The Measure of Sorrow, Stories. What can you tell us?
Oh, thank you. So I'll copy Anthony here and hold up a picture of it backwards. Yes, it's a collection of stories. I mean, from pretty much the last 7 to 10 years. They're, I guess, kind of quite sad, strange, unsettling. It's sort of weird, quiet horror spread over a bunch of stories. What more can you say about that? I don't know.
No, yeah.
I want you to tell them about sort of the setting for the novella and The Measure of Sorrow. Talk a bit about that, because I just find that like it's such a very Australian setting. So I reckon set the scene for them a little bit about where it is and what made you think of it and what real place inspired it.
Thank you, Kaaron, coming to my rescue there. Yeah, so the title novella is set in a farm stay, in New South Wales. And I don't know if farm stays are a big thing in the US, but it's a farm where they have a kind of Airbnb kind of deal where you can sort of rock up and be surrounded by sheep and live the sort of farm experience while on holiday. And a father and son at the end of a kind of disastrous beach holiday, rocking up to this farm stay where there is a pretty kind of evil looking barn that really shouldn't be there, and that the father has a strange compulsion for, a disastrous compulsion. Yeah, it is a very Australian setting. Like I always find it kind of quite weird to being, I grew up in England. So there's a sort of touch of weirdness about everything in Australia to me, the settings and the places and, the way that people talk, all the things they do. So I get really kind of a big kick out of particularly the natural landscape and how desolate and alien and, wonderful it is in that way. And I think a lot of that comes through quite a few of those stories.
You're cornering the market on evil barns there. Doing what Stephen King did with cars, you're going to do it with barns.
It's an offshoot of the haunted house, like it's a sub-genre.
Joseph, can I say I am currently reading your book and I had to stop about 2 weeks ago, and this is 100% true. One of the stories was so effective, it gave me nightmares and I had an anxiety attack when I woke up. Like I've been wanting to tell you this for a while. This is quite 100% real. The one about, I don't want to spoil it, but it involves rats. I read that story. It was beautifully written. Like the writing is incredible and rich and textured, right? So it's beautiful to read. But I read that and I'm like, oh, good story. I think I read it in the bath, right? So I had a bath, went to bed, fucking nightmares. Woke up like, ah! And then I was like, oh, and I'm like, why am I feeling like this? I got my shit in control. I haven't had anxiety like this for a while. I'm like, it was fucking Joseph.
Yeah,
that fucking story.
This is an endorsement that needs to go on the back of the book. Gave me an anxiety.
Yeah, I am no weak sister when it comes to this stuff. I watch Cannibal Holocaust for fun, but it got so far under my skin. It is superb, as you say, quiet horror, but it doesn't pull back on kind of the hard stuff when it needs to. And it's really wonderfully effective. that I will slowly finish reading because it freaks me out, man.
Well, thank you, man. But I'm both sorry and absolutely stoked at the same time. So that's
yeah, me too. Kind of like I'm like I love that stuff can affect me like that, but also Jesus, dude.
Yeah, there's more. That's more where that came from. Yeah.
So now we'll move to you, Kaaron. Kaaron Warren, you have 2 books coming out next year, and talking about covers, the book that tell me if I'm not pronouncing this correctly, Cavalria Fell Stories. You co-wrote that with Kat Sparks, and the cover is, I don't even know how to describe it. It looks like something you would see depicting like French freedom, after the French Revolution. It just looks so fucking cool.
Yeah, it's a great cover.
Can you tell us about working with someone on a collection of stories, or sorry, not collection, a novel? And what can you tell us about what the cover, how it connects to your story, if it doesn't spoil it?
No. Well, it's not. It is a collection of stories. So we've both written. I've got a new novella in there, and then I've got some reprints. And Kat has a couple of new stories and plus some reprints as well. And it came about, like, we had vaguely talked about doing this before. These are definitely more of my science fictional type stories in this collection. It's a little bit about imagined futures, I guess. And Kat is very much an environmental. What's the word? Protester. She's really big in activism. And so her stories have definitely had that slant for a long time now. And I wrote a novella, which I didn't end up trying to sell anywhere because I wasn't sure what to do with it. It's set in an old shopping mall. I basically sat there and watched hours and hours on YouTube of those amazing empty shopping malls, which you do in America better than anywhere else. The dead shopping mall is an absolute fascination of mine. And so it's set some unknown time in the future. A bunch of kids live in this shopping mall, and they basically keep themselves alive by sorting through the shops and selling what they find. And orders come in, and they sell the stuff. Anyway, so the whole thing is set in this abandoned shopping mall, which is pretty much inspired by the shopping mall that was where I used to hang out as a teenager. But also inspired by watching all of these YouTube videos. But my entire story is just set in the shopping mall. And the only editor I sent it to said, "Oh, but what's happening outside the shopping mall?" And I said, "I don't want to tell that story. That's not the story I want to tell." So I kind of decided that I needed to figure out how to tell the rest of the story without changing my novella. Kat and I realised that we were both telling stories that were kind of telling that outside. So we put them into one world and one collection. So yeah, and I've got a story. Actually, one of my short-listed stories is in there as well. Everything's so slow and quiet. It's kind of like at the end of the world when there's just one woman walking along the beach and what she's seeing and what she's hearing as the world kind of slowly sinks, I guess. So it's kind of a dark collection, but there's little threads of positive through there as well. It's about humanity and how we make the most of whatever environment we're in, as bad as it gets, but also hopefully a bit of a warning call, because I think we can do this activism stuff through fiction in some ways better than in fact. Otherwise, it feels like people are just telling you, "Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that." In fiction, you can kind of trick people into maybe changing their behaviours. Yeah, that's pretty much what how that happened. So we didn't really work together. I don't know. We actually I don't think, work together very well at all as far as writing together. We both have very different styles, which is why this book works. I think we both have very different styles, different ways of working. I think we would probably murder each other if we co-wrote something together. So we don't want that.
That would be a cool story, though, right?
That would be a cool story.
Warren versus Sparks.
So
I watched that. I definitely watched that.
Yeah, right.
And then you got the other book.
You've
seen it. You had the other book, The Under History. Could I read? It's on Goodreads, so it's like public. But do you mind if I read the first paragraph of the synopsis, because it's pretty awesome?
Yeah.
People come to visit my home, and I love to show them around. Of course, it's not the original house where it happened. That was destroyed when my entire family died. But I don't think their ghosts know the difference. Holy shit. Give me that book now. I'm not kidding. That sounds awesome. Brennan or Candace, I've been talking too much. I just wanted to get through everyone having a shot. Now you two lead the way. Fight over it. Bye, Brennan.
Candace, after you.
Oh, well, okay then. Well, since we already took care of the intros, so to speak, I'm gonna add on to that because I kind of like to start out by asking about who you are outside of the words. Who are you when you're not in front of your screen or your notepad or your pen? Like, what else do you do? What makes you tick other than the books and the stories? So, anybody who wants to start, go ahead, and then we'll just go on down the road.
Man, I feel like I just completely disappear outside of that. My body is sort of walking around in the world, doing shit, doing a job. I'm being unfair. There's my whole family. I love, being a father, being a husband, that kind of makes me feel alive. But in terms of outside of it, I kind of really feel, and sorry, this is me being one of those dicks that just flips the question and answers what I want it to be. But like, I really don't feel like I come alive or I'm touching reality outside of, outside of the family setting. If I'm not writing, it makes things realer.
Yeah.
I don't think there's that much separation with me. I think like I'm just a massive dork that likes language and fucking around. And then when I write, I'm a massive dork that likes language and fucking around. Like, I don't think there's this big separation when I'm in writer mode. It's just, I'm just putting the stuff on paper. I think for me, it's channeling a lot of sort of anxiety and angst, which, I've lived with my whole life, a bit of a family curse. And then kind of channeling it into something positive rather than, the many ways it can be channeled into negative things. So yeah, I don't think there's this Jekyll and Hyde switch for me. But I think that's quite different for a lot of people. I also write as my various day jobs as well. Like I review stuff as well, so it's all kind of writing. Whereas someone like Alan is like he's a literal ninja karate dude, like during the day. Right?
I don't do karate.
Oh no, okay. Martial arts.
It's kung fu, but
I'm sorry.
But yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the time, like I get really on a high horse when people start talking about writing rules and all this sort of stuff. You've got to write every day and all that bollocks. But I do think it's true that when you do this, you are a writer every day, regardless of how frequently you're actually writing. So I was talking about this recently with in something else that you always like observe the world and move through the world as a writer. It's not necessarily that we notice more than other people, but we notice everything and then we remember it and then we tuck it away to ferment in that little weird cupboard in the brain, and then it kind of germinates and reemerges as story. So I think regardless of what, I've been a van driver, I've worked security at nightclubs, I've been a fishmonger, I teach kung fu now as well as writing. There's that many different things that go on, but throughout all of that, I've existed as a writer because I've always had that sort of that sort of observational mindset and that desire to just turn experience into story. So yeah.
Okay.
Do you ever have that moment when like you're mid trauma and like, this sucks, but there's like a little part of you going, this is going to make a great story though. Oh my God. Like this is
going to go noticed it literally during trauma before, but in the in the process.
Like you meet someone and they're just the most insufferable asshole and you're like, I hate this person. You're definitely getting killed off.
I'm going to kill you.
I'm going to kill you so bad, man.
I'll spend a lot of time if I'm in cafes or if I'm in the supermarket or whatever else, I've always got my headphones on. But probably 50 to 75% of the time there's nothing playing through them because I'm just listening and what's going on around and just paying attention, and you're standing there feeling the avocados to feel which one's soft, and there's this couple next to you talking about euthanizing the cat or whatever. You just get something that you just sort of notice out in the world all the time. I just soak that stuff up like a sponge, man.
Yeah, me too.
So what does a fishmonger do? I don't know if that's common knowledge to all you guys, but I got no clue, and I'm curious.
Makes armor out of fish.
Nailed it. Thank you. Next question.
Yeah.
Is fishmonger not an American? Like, do you not have?
Yeah.
Like, is that not an American?
What do you call people who sell fish? Like a butcher, but fish.
The fishmonger.
That's a fishmonger, right?
No, well, we call it a fish mongrel, don't we?
It's a fish market.
Hey, a fish mongrel. Get in here.
We call it a fish mongrel.
Yeah.
Come and have a beer, you fish mongrel.
Yeah.
Fish mongrel, not your fishy. Yeah. And you don't want to have a beer with a fishy mongrel.
What's that?
Right? We avoid the fishiness.
Yeah, they stinky.
Yes, I really agree with these guys, and I don't know. It's something that's really hard to explain to a non-writer. I think just how much being a writer is about 80% of who you are as a human being. Like when someone says, "Oh, you'll give up writing one day," I'm like, "Well, I literally cannot." Like it is 80% of who I actually am. And the other 20% for me is just hanging out with friends, with family, watching crap on TV. I do love to cook. Love cooking yummy dinners and that sort of thing. And I work 2 days a week in a secondhand shop, which is all stuff that people have taken to the tip, which I don't know what you call it there, where you take your rubbish basically, and the people who own my shop go through the rubbish and bring it into the shop, and we sell it, and they make plenty of money. So that's absolutely fascinating. And just watching customers come and go, and absolutely they all start to inhabit my stories, because how could you not? There's this. We were talking about these ones last night. I think Aaron was there at our dinner last night. There's these two older ladies they're both called Debbie. Debbie. Oh, Debbie. How you going, Debbie? Come in, Debbie. Look, and they collect dolls. They collect ceramic dolls. And every day they come in and they want more of those creepy dolls. They come in on they've got the little motorized little chair things. And they're, oh, Debbie, there's more dolls. Debbie. So, So while I'm at work serving the Debbies and looking after the Debbies, I'm thinking you poor ladies are going in one of my stories. There is no doubt.
Karen, sorry about interrupting. I just had to ask, the two Debbies, they're not sisters, both named Debbie, right? They're just friends.
I don't think they're sisters. Well, they could be mother and daughter. It's very hard to tell exactly how old they are, but yes. Anyway,
I'm kind of obsessed with the Debbies now. I'm not going to lie.
The Debbies, you got to come and meet the Debbies.
That's hilarious. It's like,
and you got to clear the whole shop, because they really are. They're very large, and they have very large motorized chairs each.
Oh wow!
With lots of bags. They are fascinating people. But I really love that, because because it's physical work in the shop, and the whole time I'm looking after other people and thinking about other people. So it takes me out of my head. And I'm not really thinking about being a writer while I'm doing that, because it's really physically demanding, but great fun. And it's a really good contrast to that really internal writerly stuff that you do most of the rest of the time.
Okay.
Am I up next? I'm here to put the tone down. My day job encompasses significant parts of my life, and writing is part of my way of my coping strategy with my day job. I work with in a number of vulnerable people, but primarily at the moment with victims and survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And I have, over the past 20 years, worked in homelessness advocacy, practitioner work with people with complex trauma, women and children surviving family and domestic violence, and people who normally don't they slip through the cracks, and that's where I kind of have worked and made my speciality. So I do kind of carry around this little kind of shadow gremlin on my shoulders that is just the accumulation of all of that trauma. And if I don't just bleed it out a little bit, it does tend to get very, very heavy. And there have been times in my life where it has got too heavy and I haven't shaken it off. But writing has become my outlet for that in a really great way. That means that I feel like I can work in a healthy and happy way, and have the mental space to go out for dinner last night with Karen and Cat Sparks, and for us to talk about them and to watch them basically kill each other as they try to collaborate and the like, and to have fun on things like this, and yet still have time to write and to feel like I've got that balance. But it also probably explains why my fiction does tend to be of a certain type of fiction. And it is literally just all that trauma on the page. It's probably why it's dark. But I guess it's hopefully it's an empathetic invitation for people to explore certain parts of the world that we sometimes otherwise don't want to look at. And that's why I think horror is perfect, because and Kaaron has said this many times to me, but horror doesn't flinch. Don't flinch. And that's why I really like this genre, and that's what my relationship is to my work. So that's what I do outside of work.
And can I just jump in to say, in echo of what Aaron said, if you've not read his collection, Cut to Care, get on it and read that, because it's absolutely the quintessence of what Aaron's describing here.
I second that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I want to jump in with kind of a broad and relatively unfair question, because if it were presented to me, I'm not really sure how I'd answer it. So what I want to ask you all is, do you find that there are any characteristics, topics, or tropes that are kind of present in Australian horror or like fiction at period, whether or not you actively explore them in your own work? Alan, let's start with you.
Kangaroos.
Of course. Beyond the obvious.
Yeah. That's the easy one. Right there. There it is. Right there. I don't know. I think everywhere has a particular sort of sensibility, and we kind of get saturated with American content. So everywhere's kind of aware of so many of the American idiosyncrasies, which is not so true for Americans of everywhere else, but everywhere. And like Joseph mentioned it earlier, saying, because same as Joseph, I grew up in the UK, so like everywhere is weird to me now. It's like I have an accent wherever I go, because over here people say I sound like a Pom. When I go back to the UK, everyone's like, oh God, you sound like such an Aussie. It's like everywhere I go I have an accent. Like everywhere is weird. Like I haven't been in the UK for a quarter of a century living there, so it's different now to where I grew up, and Australia isn't where I grew up, so it's weird and different and strange. And so all those I explore a lot of those sorts of discrepancies in a lot of the sort of horror that I do. A lot of that kind of stuff, things like, where I write stuff like The Gulp, and that it's always about somewhere that's both familiar but also weird and strange and not quite right. So for me, that's what Australia's like, because I've lived here for almost half my life, but I didn't grow up here, and it's always going to be weird and strange and not quite right. As well as the fact that it's just, it's a continent as well, which does my head in. Like you travel from one state to another. It's like traveling from one country to another. So, I would ride my motorcycle in the UK. We'd get on the ferry at Dover. We get off in Calais and ride to Berlin. Effectively, you could ride through 3 or 4 countries in the course of a day without thinking twice about it. Whereas you do that from Sydney and you're not even halfway across New South Wales. So these things become, whether you intend them to or not, these things kind of become infused in the stories and stuff that you write that are set in these places. And it's become important to me to set stuff in Australia. Like, weirdly enough, it started with the Roo, because that was a joke. It was a gag, and it ended up just really taking off, and made me realize just how hungry people were for stories that were very much Australian. And that's what led me to then write The Gulp and The Fall. And since then, I've very much embraced the weirdness that is Australia in what I write. So, and I think that's true of a lot of us, that we do that. Joseph does the same, and even, I can't think of any of us that don't embrace at least slightly that Australian aspect of what we do, even when we write things that are not specifically set in Australia or don't have to be. That sort of sensibility comes through, I think. It's kind of unavoidable, really. I don't even know if that answered your question, but I just rambled.
Australia is a deeply weird country, though. It's this weird contradiction. Like it's sort of like this primeval ancient land, and on the edges of it, we've got sort of bronzed casual larrikins, drinking beer and getting cancer from the sun on the beach. And then we've got the largest collection of like deadly animals and insects, like just everywhere.
That's a perfect example, right? Because everybody's always talking about everything in Australia will kill you. You know, there's sharks, there's a snake, there's a spiders, and what people tend to avoid, but it's no less true, is that Australia itself will kill you. Like, it eats a few tourists every year. They go wandering off. They go, oh, we're going to take a drive through the outback, and like at least 2 or 3 German tourists disappear in Western Australia.
They get left on the barrier reefs or in the desert, and they're just
or get left on the barrier reef.
Sorry, mate, we lost a couple. Sorry.
Yeah, it's acceptable losses. It's collateral. When I was first in Australia, we drove down. I arrived. I'd been in Southeast Asia for months traveling, and I first arrived in Australia in Darwin. So my first experience of Australia was Darwin in summer, which was a unique thing in itself. But then we sort of drove down through the middle, and we were driving all over. And at one point, we basically turned right at Tennant Creek, heading across the Northern Territory and heading towards Queensland, cross country, which is basically just days of fuck all. And at one point, we'd been going along for a couple of hours, and we came across this guy walking along, rolling a wheel, like a car wheel, along the side of the road. And he was hot and sweating and pink, and like, what the fuck are you doing? And we pulled over, and he's like, we got a puncture. And basically, they didn't have a spare. Most people who know have got any modicum of sense, take at least 2 spares when you're driving in Australia. But this guy, they got a flat tire, didn't have a spare. His mate was waiting with the car. He'd already been walking for 3 hours. We'd driven 2 hours before we reached him, and he's just rolling this wheel along. And he was planning to walk it to somewhere, get it fixed, and walk it back. Like, his mate would have been dead before he got the tire fixed, and he probably would have. Anyway, so we ended up driving him to this place, getting it fixed, and driving him back with a load of water and everything else. But this sort of thing that can happen in this country, that people just don't take the country itself seriously. You don't need to worry about the spiders and the snakes and anything else. People just get literally eaten by Australia itself. It's brilliant.
The land will swallow you, and the locals.
Yeah, land will eat you whole.
Yeah.
Talking about, like, so Brennan, your question was kind of around what are the tropes in I guess it's also Australian fiction, or what makes something uniquely Australian. And I think there's a real gradient of that, like a real spectrum that goes from the kind of I'm going to take your name in vain here, Alan, and you, Anthony. So, but both from the sort of Australia, the Roo, and I'd argue kind of Wolf Creek kind of end of the spectrum, which is that very what an international audience, how they see Australia. It's that kind of perception of that this is all of Australia, through to quite sort of, I guess, more sort of subtly Australian, in the sense that it's kind of perhaps more like urban Australian, or you read it and you go, fuck, this is super Australian, but it doesn't have any of that kind of any of the recognizable trappings. And I'd think of a book like Kaaron's first novel, Slights, which is like one of the most Australian novels ever written, but it doesn't have any of those kind of like obvious Australia tropes. I don't think there's a single kangaroo in the whole thing, but it's so kind of, because it's all kind of through the voice of this very unique character, but a uniquely sort of urban Australian character. It's absolutely dripping with Australianness, but in this kind of quite unconventional way. So I think there's a real there isn't really just one or two things you can point to. It's a real
there's a perfect example of that just recently, not in book but in film, with Talk to Me, the new horror movie Talk to Me that's just come out. It's absolutely outstanding. It's a brilliant film, and it's made in Adelaide, it's South Australia, and that's exactly like you're talking about, Joseph. It is so Australian, but completely doesn't matter. It doesn't draw anything. Like, there's at one point where they hit a roo driving home one night that might just as well be a deer, but otherwise, other than the accents, you wouldn't necessarily know it was Australian in terms of content and story and whatever else. And yet it is so Australian in the way the characters interact and everything like that. And one of the, it's a brilliant horror movie, but one of the things I liked about it the most was how it was just unashamedly Australian and just a brilliant story all the same,
I got one for you. Martin Freeman's Cargo. That movie is amazing, and it definitely tackles the social, economical situations of modern Australia. Like, it talks about the indigenous people and Martin, who's a white dude, and his baby, like that movie is still terrifying.
I haven't seen it. I have to check it out.
Oh, you haven't seen Cargo? It's based on one of the great shorts, like one of the great
It is so good,
short
man.
films, and it's expanded really well. And it's this amazing stuff it does with like indigenous characters. And there was a rumor for a while there was going to be another one that followed more the indigenous story, and it just didn't happen. It would have been amazing.
I'll have to check it out.
Really, really nails like a kind of Australian vibe. But you talked about Kaaron before. Kaaron, all your books are set in this weird other world, but they all feel very Australian. Is that like a deliberate thing with you? Like, is that your kind of your way of doing the Australian thing?
Yeah, and I don't really necessarily want to identify with a particular place. Like I want everyone to feel like it could be their place. And like Slights in particular, that's one that people said, oh yeah, that was set in Perth, wasn't it? And then someone else was like, oh, that was Brisbane. I know it was Brisbane. And it wasn't any of those places. It was just a conglomeration of all of them. Warren World, basically, and Anthony, I think. So I deliberately don't necessarily identify. Like the Underhistory is the next one. I kind of know where it's set, but I never wanted to be too specific about which exact little country town it was set in or which area it was. But still just managing to have those little details about supermarkets and how supermarkets work and all that sort of thing.
So I remember Bitters felt like it really feels like it's set in Australia with there's some colloquialisms and whatnot, but again, it's never explicit.
I never say where it is. Yeah, so everyone can think that it's near them. You can look out the door and you can see this giant metal man. I think to go back to Brendan, your question about this, to me, one of the tropes or the feels of Australia, something that all of us tackle in our fiction, is the isolation, and it's what the guys have been saying a little bit about how easy it is to get eaten by Australia, the isolation and the distance between places, and how careful you have to be of that. There's going way back into the past. There's a trope called the drover's wife, which was originally a poem, but it's been a painting, it's been a movie, it's been a novel. This idea that of the woman left alone while the husband goes off droving to take the cattle across the country, or even he's away for 3 or 4 weeks at a time, and she's left alone there in the bush with a kid, no way of communication, no other adult around her, just her and the baby. And it's about the battles that she goes through. And I love that. It's about the strength of a woman and how much she'll do to keep her kid alive, how she's got to step up and know that she can rely on nobody else. It's her against Australia, basically. The snakes and the heat and all the rest of it. So I think that sense follows through all Australian horror in particular, Australian fiction as well, but Australian horror has this thread of how easy it is and how quickly you can be isolated and how quickly it can all turn on you. I think that's kind of a trope that you can't quite avoid if you're setting something set in Australia.
I was like the movie Razorback, which is basically about so like it's about a giant pig that is killing a bunch of people, but that's not even close to what's the amazing thing about Razorback. The amazing thing about Razorback is the locals and the environment and these kind of devastated looking outback shots and that really captures a sense of how deeply strange this place is.
So when I was when did Razorback come out? Like 92 or something?
Yeah.
Or 89. Anyway, so I would have been in my early 20s, like 20, 21 years old. And me and my friends, we used to get together of a Friday night. We would go to Blockbuster. We would pick a video that we would watch, then we'd drop it home, go to the pub, get drunk, come back and watch whatever movie we'd selected earlier that night. And that's how I discovered Razorback. So imagine this sort of bunch of 20-year-old English dudes. They go to the pub, drink a few pints, come back and stick Razorback on. And just blew our fucking minds, man. That film is just so bonkers. And when I wrote The Roo, my thought process was, The Roo's got to be a kangaroo version of Razorback. But I hadn't seen the film for like 25 years, and I deliberately didn't watch it again before I wrote The Roo. And then I wrote the book and got all that sorted out. I was like, right, I'm going to watch it again now. And I was still blown away by just how fucking crazy it is. It's just so Australian. It's just so weird, man. It's just wild. It's absolutely like, there's nothing more Australian in terms of film than Razorback. Wake in Fright, Razorback, and Wolf Creek are the kind of a trifecta that will give you a real spread of what's going on as far as Australian, like non-urban horror, I reckon.
Yeah,
I got one more for you guys, and I don't know who's like up to date with this because it's a little kid show, but Bluey is blowing up It's
Bluey is
seriously
brilliant.
I love it. Alan, you said some funny stuff. How they don't use all the vocabulary that a father would, or a parent would call a son or something.
Yeah. I mean, the parents in Bluey really set an unrealistically high bar of how good a parent
They're
can be. It's like that's the only problem I have with it. Is like I can never be as good a dad as Bandit, and it's like.
I try too, man. It's impossible. He never he's always in the perfect state of mind.
Yeah, the Chili and Bandit have got way more patience than any real parent, but yeah.
But it's interesting because my wife is in this group chat for moms that have, younger kids, and it's a Bluey group, and it's really neat. Like it's it's given that connection between Australia and kind of spotlighting it with the world. And my wife and I are learning stuff about it. Like they use terms that I'm not familiar with. So because it's an Australian show, and it's just talking about like a day-to-day life in suburbia in Australia. So that's kind of neat, I would think, because wouldn't that open up potential people to explore more of Australia in other ways?
I think it's becoming more and more popular across media. Like the people are being less parochial about stuff like that. And for Australians, like Bluey is so Brisbane. Like
I don't know what that means.
Well, so Brisbane is the capital of Queensland, right? The state of Queensland. So from an Australian perspective, it's really clear that Bluey is set in Queensland, presumably Brisbane or Brisbane suburbs. But then from the greater world, it's obviously just Australian. Now, I think you get these kind of layers of identity of what's in there, something like that. But I think there's definitely more and more hunger for all forms of media, film, TV, books, everything that is not just British or American, which has just saturated media for so long. And Australia is in a great place to provide it because we've got brilliant writers, we've got brilliant content in all that media that is ready to go out there. And, the more people come looking for it, the better. The more successful things like Bluey are, the knock-on effect is the more successful people like us have a chance at being, because people will be looking, what else is coming out of Australia? What else is coming from, not America, whatever.
There's a really interesting thing about Bluey that I have been hearing about people calling in the States in particular, having their kids saying Australian expressions, like they're going to take the rubbish out, for example, which is apparently not a thing that people say in the States, but that's something we all would say. We're taking the rubbish. It's the equivalent of we're going to put the trash out on the curb or whatever. But the thing about that as an example that's interesting is it speaks to kind of the initial question we were talking about, which is about what is it that makes this type of stuff very Australian. Firstly, for me, I wouldn't know how not to do it. But there have been times in my professional career where I've said to myself very early on, if this was set in the States, it would be more accessible, right? If it was set somewhere more identifiable and it didn't seem to have these alienating kind of qualities to it, then it would be more broadly kind of embraced. Well, that's actually total bullshit. That's absolutely not the case. The things that make stuff transferable is stuff that feels real. And that means sometimes I am at a point in my career where I'm like, nah, I'm just going to write my own experience and double down. And even if people don't understand exactly what a particular word or expression means, if it's genuine on the page, it goes so much louder than it would have been to kind of have held back. And I think that that's some of the things that makes Australian horror fiction, film, art really, really interesting. And there are certain things that I think do spring out and are emerging more, which is kind of like the artistic expression of discomfort, which I know sounds really, really broad, but I think it comes from something specific around identity. Like, I think it must be a really blessed thing to know who you are. And I think Australians as a country probably wrestle with this far more than what we actually think we do. I remember growing up and being in school and being people like teachers saying to us, we're a really young nation. And I'm like, well, that's actually bullshit. We have the oldest Indigenous population on the world. This country belongs to them. There is this dichotomy between that relationship and colonialism here. There is the bush as we know it versus the city as we know it. There is there is the things that we promote to the world, which is, throw another shrimp on the Barbie, versus immigrant populations who are bringing different foods and cultures. And so it is this incredible melting pot of contrasts. And I think that there is something that is growing, which is I think horror in Australia is becoming the horror of the domestic, which is kind of an acknowledgement that we don't exactly know where we fit, how we fit in, and that we walk in parallel with all of these different contrasts continuously. And that's why I have never been more excited by Australian horror fiction, for example. And that's why I'm like, I've never felt more confidence in the kind of okay to say, this is my experience with and my relationship with my country. And it's not always flattering either. And I think that that's really an exciting opportunity for really unique voices and kind of perspectives to kind of come into the picture. There's a really good example, and I went through my bookshelf picking out a couple of really great Australian horror novels that I really love, and one's called Dead Europe by Christos Tsiolkas, who people might know internationally because he wrote a book called The Slap, which is not a horror novel at all, well, maybe to some degree. And it's and Dead Europe is about a photographer who is the second generation Greek immigrants in Australia, who after the death of their patriarch goes back to Greece to find the origin stories of all of his grandfather's ghost stories that he would tell and kind of raise him. And so it's a novel that is absolutely about saying, I don't know who I am. I don't know where I sit in the world, but all I know is that my ghosts come with me wherever I go. And it's a really great example of this kind of really hard to define new thing that's happening in horror fiction down here. And I think it's great. And you certainly see it in Kaaron's work, I think, definitely. Just the horror of the immediate and the domestic. And I can't believe we started off on that spiel by talking about Bluey.
My hell of a transition.
My wife and I always tell my son to take a bushwee, and that is definitely from Bluey. Because that's
take a
bushwee.
A bushwee.
Yeah.
All right.
As soon as you got kids, you learn all about bushwees, man.
But bushwee's not really very acceptable in the States, is it? Or maybe it's just in certain kind of parts of the States.
No, it's not even like that. It's not even like a thing we say.
When I was kind of, I don't know, maybe like 6 or 7, went to the States and stayed with some friends of my parents in Ohio, I think it was. And we went to this big cookout, and I just went and pissed against a tree, and like everyone, like the entire, like 30, 40 people at this barbecue just staring aghast.
Whoa.
A kid doing a wee, which, is, bushwee. Like, it's just.
What are you supposed to do? Like, what do you just.
If there's no toilets, what are you supposed to do?
When you're going on any road trip, you certainly see any number of bushwees happening along the way, don't you?
You see that thing where the car's pulled over at the side of the road with the door open, and there's a parent doing the crouch, holding the knees, doing the hammock.
Yes.
That's why people plant trees along the highway, surely.
That's right.
I did a bushwee on the Sydney Harbour Bridge one time when I was a kid. We were stuck in a traffic jam. True story. It actually was quite traumatic. I must have been like,
not a bushwee, that's a bridgeway.
Somewhere between 6 and 8.
Don't
judge. And I really needed to go, and like we were stuck for like 45 minutes in this traffic. I mean, it felt like 40. It might have been like whatever. So I had to get up, and Mum sort of came with me and shielded me, and I had to sort of piss with these lines of cars off as far you can see in both directions. And I'm like, I'm freaking out because this was horrible. I think for years it fucked with me, and eventually I was cool with it. But yeah, it was a bushwee on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I don't recommend it. Broad daylight, middle of a traffic jam.
I've totally been there, but I've been the driver as an adult in my 30s and gone, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this, but if I don't get out of this situation real soon, that lemon iced tea bottle down that's been rolling around at the bottom of the car is looking really, really like desperate times.
Well, so I think the British comedian Sarah Milligan, she tells this story about how she was caught in a traffic jam in the UK. She was sitting in her car, and the traffic wasn't going anywhere. She couldn't go anywhere. It was like there were cars everywhere. There was no cover, like fields on the side. There was nowhere to hide. And she got to the point she couldn't hold it anymore. So she just moved over onto the passenger seat, pissed on the passenger seat, moved back into the driver's seat. And when the traffic jam finally cleared, she just drove straight to a car detailing place and went, my dog pissed in my car when I left it in the supermarket. Can you like steam in the seats. She said she uses it as a bit in comedy now, but like would never admit that she had nothing. She just had no idea what to do, nothing to piss in, so just pissed on the seat.
When you got to go,
as
you got to go.
Yeah, and this is where you get from
like when you said Patrick, when you said the bush wee, like I kind of went, oh, what's that? Because it's just a wee. Like I don't even know that I've just called it. I'm not sure that they've renamed it in that show, so it's going to make sense to.
That's because your kids are older, Karen. So you haven't been watching Bluey with any regularity.
Oh but we don't. Like I wouldn't call it a bush wee though. I just call it doing a wee. Go and do a wee behind the bush.
Or having a slash.
Yeah. Having a slash. Yeah.
Is that American or Australian? I always thought it was Australian, but I thought Americans say
British, isn't it?
We say
English too.
British. Okay. Right.
We say taking a piss or taking a leak. Well, us undignified folks do. I can't speak for Candace and Brennan. I do. I say taking a piss.
Yeah, I'm surrounded by savages.
I kind of like slash. I feel like I'm going to use that now.
Slash is awesome, right?
You're such a dag.
Roll.
Aaron, I do want to spotlight your book from 2 years ago. Dirty Heads, a novella, because you're talking about like experimentation, not knowing, and this and that, and that's a good example of that. I've never, like Chuck Palahniuk, he talks about having a timer, I believe it is. I might be messing up his. I'm not quoting him, paraphrasing, but he says having a timer, and you quite literally have that in Dirty Heads. I just wanted to hear kind of if you had anything to add about that.
About the in terms of the
as far as experimenting with the literal format of the book.
Yeah,
that might be a stretch from Australia specifically, but I just kind of wanted you to talk about that book.
Yeah. Look, I appreciate you highlighting that book, and that book certainly touches on all of the things we've spoken about so far. In terms of identity and history and our relationship with our past and our futures, and it also touches on all of the the tropes as well, which is why I kind of like my kitchen sink little book, which is it's a small book. But what you're talking about is the fact that the chapters I played with the format and the form. Because I'm a writer. I love writing because I love the craft of writing as well, and I really like the idea of kind of messing with it as much as I can. And as I grow as a writer, I like to push myself more and to make things more transgressive and to embrace ambiguity, and also to use if people are going to spend their money to buy a book, I want the book to look, feel good, and for a book to be the type of thing that has an actual, for that particular story, I wanted it to, you open it up and the chapters are going to count backwards, even though the story is going to be told in a linear fashion mostly. I want it to have the experience of cracking open an old VHS kind of clamshell or chucking a movie in an old VHS machine, and begins with tracking lines, and the book is called Dirty Heads because it references the idea of tapes used to get dirty heads, and you'll be watching Mad Max 2, and all of a sudden the entire TV screen would just fill with snow, or this static of snow, which is very, very incongruous to the outback setting. And I wanted to replicate some of those tangible feelings through craft and layout in that particular book because it fit the theme so well. But I did the counting down. I've done the counting down of chapters for a number of years now. It started in House of Size because I wanted things to have an immediacy, and I wanted people to have a kind of subliminal dread mechanism that helps to sustain people through 300 pages of a book. You know what I mean? It's a cheeky little thing, but I really enjoyed playing with it. Different fonts, all sorts of different things. I'm here for it. Let's make books exciting again, and also make the act of owning a book and holding it and being able to flip through it as exciting as you possibly can. And I really wanted to put everything into that little book, and people seem to like it for that reason, in addition to the story. So yeah, that's that book.
Subliminal Dread Mechanism is the name of my new band.
I literally wrote that down. I'm not even kidding. I've got it here. I'm like, Subliminal Dread Mechanism. That is awesome. I love that.
Fucking brilliant.
That's your new album.
It's such a great tenor phrase.
Yeah.
It's all just chants. It's kind of little chants and Gregorian chants and droning sounds, and then the occasional discordant clap. That's all it is.
Every now and then a scream like a half-remembered nightmare in the dark echoes.
Oh.
Very good. Very good.
That's you waking up after reading Joseph's story, apparently. And
Oh my God.
Having an anxiety attack.
I'm not, I literally haven't gone back to the book yet because I'm too scared it's going to fuck me up even more. Like I'm just sitting there in my pile of shame.
Brennan, I think now's the time to kind of wrap down, and I want you to ask your question that you had a few good ones. I wanted you to ask your.
That went from singular to plural real quick. All right, I'm gonna throw one out here.
That was witty.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So actually, one thing I've really enjoyed listening to over the last hour or so is the way that every single one of you, when answering a question, doesn't even matter what the topic is, always have found ways to kind of segue into supporting each other's work, and so organically, it's really, really cool. So I'm wondering if you could share any other Australian writers, horror or otherwise, that people listening to the show might not be aware of, or that you would highly encourage them to check out. Anthony, I'd love to throw it to you first.
Oh God, there's so many, but a guy that I sort of discovered recently who happens to be a really nice bloke is Zachary Ashford, who kind of skews from the school of Guy Smith. I don't know if you know Guy Smith. Guy Smith was a guy that wrote like 11. There's a whole bunch of stuff about Guy Smith in Australia because Franger, the lead character, is obsessed with him. But he wrote like 11 novels about killer crabs and 2 short story collections because legend. And he just, he was the master of the kind of short, sharp creature feature. And Zachary Ashford's really taken that mantle and run with it. The one by him that I really liked recently was called, I keep mispronouncing the name, but Polyphemus. About a death metal band or a black metal band. I know that fans of both genres get angry when you confuse them, but I don't care. And so it's one of those metal bands, and they make a Faustian pact, and it's gory and funny and dark and a messy type of thing. And I thoroughly recommend it. It's a real hoot of a read.
Aaron, how about you?
A couple of people. Look, I really appreciate you kind of highlighting the fact that we do support each other because we really do. I felt that as though I was writing for a long period of time in a vacuum, and then all of a sudden I found my peeps and I totally underestimated how important as a writer community is, and that is something that has made my creative output, I think, stronger. So I think, and it's something that really, really happens. I live in Canberra, which is, for people who don't know, is basically kind of like our little Washington DC kind of, public servant town, only it's small and it exists in the bush. If you go 15 minutes in that direction, you are in the bush. 15 minutes in that direction, you're in the bush. And we are the capital of this country, and it's a public servant town. And yet in this weird little kind of cement oasis, there is this incredibly fertile creative scene that kind of comes from the underbelly of all this, and it is, without question, I'm telling you, the epicenter of Australian horror. Like, it really has become that. And I think it's there will one day be essays about what is the weird alchemy of why horror kind of springs here and people come in, from it's just so weird. And so we get a lot of horror writers coming through town, which is so fun. We have really great horror writers there. If you want a really good solid recommendation, I think Rob Hood's recent novel Scavengers is brilliant. His short story collection Peripheral Visions is bloody terrific. And I'm not too sure where he's based, but I think Brett McBean is really great. He wrote a book called The Last Hotel that just absolutely makes me squee. I think it's really good. I think you absolutely need to check out the works of everyone in this room. There are other authors who have kind of worked on the periphery of genre for a long period of time, who are, people. I love Gabriel Lord, who wrote Fortress, and Tooth and Claw. Last night Victor Kelleher came up at dinner. So there are a number of different authors, and I think that there are people who I'm forgetting that I shouldn't, and they will come back to me. But those are just a few that spring to mind.
Kaaron, I'm going to throw it to you. I'm writing down names here.
Yeah, we should type them up too in the chat so we can make sure we keep track of. I'm going to mention a couple. Kirsten McDermott is a woman. She's been writing almost as long as I have, which is quite a long time, and been publishing as long. She is just the most amazingly dark, twisted brain of a writer. I just absolutely love her stuff. She often draws in art and why we do the things we do, obsessions. She writes about relationships, and she's not afraid to. She never flinches, as Aaron said before. It's always my judgment of how people are as a writer. Do they flinch or not? She's amazing. And also
Kaaron, what's that Kirsten book that was you had Through Splintered Walls, and she had a collection with that same set, and it had that dolls story in it?
Yes, yeah. Well, I can't remember what hers was called. That is an amazing series, actually. I'm glad you brought that up. That was an incredible series. It's through 12th Planet Press, and they did a series called The 12 Planets, and it was all women writers, and each of us got a certain. I think we had 150 pages. So some people had 4 short stories. I had 1 novella and 3 short stories. Yeah, Kirsten's was amazing. I can't remember what it's called though.
I'm looking it up for you now. I'm going to find. Caution contains small parts.
That's right. Yes. No,
that's what it was called. That book is unbelievable. So yours is amazing as well. Through Splintered Walls. Those two, out of that whole selection, those 2 in particular just blew my mind. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you. Thank you, Al, for reminding me of that, though. It is an amazing series, definitely worth checking out. Yeah, and to have that opportunity to just write whatever you wanted and just explore. Mine in that one, or explored the landscape in different ways, which is exactly what we're talking about. Road, creek, sky and mountain were the 4 stories I had in that one. The mountain was inspired by, there's a certain road that you travel when you go from Canberra down to the beach, and there's a certain part that you stop. And anyone who's travelled that road, who's from Canberra or from down the beach, there's a place called Pooh's Corner, which is about halfway down the mountain, and it's got all Winnie the Poohs in there, which have been constantly replaced over about 20 years, I think. And when you go on that road, when you've got little kids in the car, you're going, oh, just keep an eye out for Pooh's Corner. And then you see Pooh's Corner, and then that kind of distracts them for about half a minute. But the other person I wanted to highlight is J.S. Brookelar, who's a Sydney writer, amazing novelist and short story writer. She's got a novella coming out through PS next year, I think, as well as Alan and a couple of others. The Bridge is her latest novel. Her short story collection is, I can't remember.
Collision.
Gone a blank, but anyway. Hey?
Collision.
She's amazing. That's right, Collision. Absolutely amazing, amazing writer. Just like a master at the way she structures a story. And I've seen her do it. She's absolutely incredible. So yeah, that's just a couple that I'd like to mention.
List is growing. Yeah. Alan, how about you?
I mean, first of all, just second all of that. I mean, the people in this Zoom are basically my favorite horror writers in Australia, so that's a start. And Jenny Brookelar, Kirsten McDermott, outstanding. Another vote for Zachary Ashford. He's a real rising star. He's a really nice guy, and I only discovered him relatively recently. But he is great. He wrote When the Cicadas Stopped Singing, which is a great title for a book, and it's basically a sort of creature feature, but it's got so much more than that. And you've got me to thank for why it's called that, because the title he originally had on it was terrible. But it was such a great book, and so that was where I first discovered him. But I will also drop a mention for someone else. Joanne Anderton is a writer who doesn't get enough. She doesn't promote herself enough as well, and I kick her ass about it all the time. She's genuinely one of the best writers Australia's produced. She's absolutely outstanding, and she's got she's got some novels. She had a trilogy of sort of these kind of weird science fantasy novels, but in terms of horror stories, she writes amazing horror that often overlaps science fiction in a really unique way. She's got a collection called The Bone Chime Song. And her more recent collection is the Art of Broken Things, is it? I'm having a mental blank. Yes, The Art of Broken Things. That's right. I just had to double check. Yeah, that was the latest one that came out. Her stories are just superb. She's absolutely worth checking out. She's a brilliant writer. Her ideas are just so twisted. She's awesome. So yeah, that would my tip on top of everyone else.
Man, Joseph, I'm so sorry to save you for last. Do you have anybody to add?
sucks to be last on a thing like that. Everyone has said, all of the people that I would have said, I definitely kind of echo Kirsten McDermott and Joe Anderton again. Like Al, she's like one of my favorite. Present company accepted, one of my favorite. The one person we haven't mentioned who is a big favorite of mine is Matthew R. Davis.
Okay, good call. Good call.
Fantastic books. One of my favorites of his is called The Dark Matter of Natasha.
Yeah,
which is it's one of those books where it's a kind of a throw it across the room when you're done. It's so awful, like sort of ballsily awful, and it goes to all of the worst places and then just stays there and then refuses to kind of repent at the end. But it's brilliant, and everyone should go out and read it.
That's a great example, especially with horror, of how much you can get into a novella, because that's probably, I don't know, but I'm guessing it's probably like 35,000 words or something. It's very much a horror novella, and there is just so much crammed in that story. It's
very Australian. It's very Australian.
Very Australian, yeah. Very nostalgic as well, even for people like us who didn't grow up in Australia. There's that overlap of growing up anywhere, and in this case, particularly Australia. It's like, yeah.
Sort of scungy teenage.
Yeah.
Times you'd rather not remember too much.
All the filth and regret.
Brennan, you want me to take this away?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So normally we just ask like what you're reading right now, and I'd like to know that. But I also want to throw on there, if we haven't covered something that you want to talk about, when it's your turn, definitely bring up any topic you want. So we'll start with Kaaron. What are you currently reading, and is there anything that we missed that you want to talk about?
Oh gosh, well that second part's a very big question. I'm not sure about that.
Open-ended.
So I'm reading for an awards at the moment for which I can't actually talk what I'm reading. I've been reading 38 or something books for that, but I can't mention them quite yet. But what I'm about to read and have started reading, and I can't stop talking about this book, The Executioner's Song, Norman Mailer. It's a fictional non-fiction novel type thing inspired by Gary Gilmore. So it's not an Australian book, sadly, but by Gary Gilmore, who was the guy who killed 2 people in the 1970s when he was robbing shops and things, and was determined to die. He wanted to be put to death. He didn't want to spend life in jail. And I had never thought I would read this book, but I listened to the audiobook of it, and just some of these details were so disturbing and so fascinating. Things like he had a much younger girlfriend. I think she was 20 or 22 and he was 38, something like that. And he had convinced her that she needed to die as well. He was going to die and she should die. So he arranged for her to get hold of lots of sleeping pills. He made her give him half. I'm not going to describe on air how she smuggled them in and then how he smuggled them out again. But anyway, but that didn't work because she didn't have enough. So she was in hospital for 6 months, something like that. But then his last gift to her, he took his watch, which is the only thing of value he had left. He set it to the time of his death because he knew, of course, what time he was going to die because he was being executed, and he smashed it. And he said, "Give that to my girlfriend." And that just gives me goosebumps. Like, who does that? What is that about? So I'm absolutely fascinated by him. He still had people around him who were supporting him and loved him, even though he came across as this, like, how can you love someone like that? So I'm fascinated to know how people can still love a man who behaves like that. So yeah, that's what I'm going to get stuck into once I finish the reading for this awards.
Yeah, I'm never going to pretend I can guess what you're going to say. Blow my mind. That's a wild story.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, that's part of your history, I suppose, to a certain extent, but it was a long time. It was quite a long time ago. And the book is based on long interviews. Like, he was quite a well-educated man. He's described as being really intelligent, this Gary Gilmore. So based on a series of many interviews that they did with him and with all the people around him. Norman Mailer did some, but there was a couple of other journalists who would basically take it in turns to talk to him because it was exhausting and I think totally demoralizing by the end of it. So just fascinated by some of the details of the things that he did and what it means about the legal system, and someone fighting to be put to death, determined to die, and in a way, that's my book. Tide of Stone is about men like him, I guess. In Tide of Stone, it's people like him, but even worse human beings who are given eternal life and locked up. So it's exactly
as soon as you started talking about it, I started thinking about Tide of Stone, going, I've read Kaaron's book, I'd choose death too.
yeah, that's right. But yes, so did he get away? Like, how does he have the right? Like, he killed these two young men with young families. No reason whatsoever. They weren't even going to be real witnesses. He just did it because he felt like it. And leaving those families behind, and how they would feel about him getting what he wants. And it was even things like he wanted his ashes spread over different places. So a whole bunch of people got into an aeroplane and off they went, and they did exactly what he wanted. Like, how did he get that right to get his ashes spread where he wanted them to be spread, as opposed to flushed down the toilet or whatever's the most disgusting thing you think to do with someone's ashes? So
God, yeah,
how he manipulated people, how he managed to get exactly what he wanted is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Like a really inspiring story for sociopaths. Like, we're all appalled, but if you're a sociopath, you're like, wow, he did so well. Oh my God.
Goals.
What an inspiring story.
Yes. And how charisma gets someone through so much.
Yeah.
As opposed to somebody who does very good works, but they don't have that charisma and don't have that instant likability or whatever. Like, clearly he must have had that to get away with it.
Yeah.
And so I'm just really, we all explore that stuff in our work, I think. It's like, how do people get away with stuff? How is one character likable and the other character not likable, and yet one's murdering people and we still like them? And fascinating.
Yeah. Jay, you're next. Good luck.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna switch tack completely, because I'm actually having I'm reading a lot of comics at the moment, just because sometimes you just want to not read words. But in terms of kind of books that I'm reading, the ones that are popping out are what I'm reading with my kids. Both of them are kind of my kids, like 9, 13-year-old boys. With one, I'm reading Watership Down, which I'm sure everyone, if you haven't read it, you've seen the movie. And if you haven't, then Jesus, go out and do both of those things right now. Like, I've read this book probably like 3 or 4 times in my life, and every time I read it, I'm like, fuck, that is absolutely the best book that's ever been written in the history of all books ever. And even reading it again this time, literally the 4th time, knowing everything that's going to happen, I'm still having my mind completely blown apart by just how exceptionally good it is, and how much I feel for all those rabbits. They're like brothers to me, man. Like, I'm so close to all of them, and we're bearing down on the heartbreak at the end, and I'm not sure I'm emotionally prepared yet.
You're reading it with the 9-year-old or the 13-year-old?
The 9-year-old, yeah. So
dude,
there will be fallout, possibly this weekend. So I'm bracing myself. With my eldest, we're having this kind of hardcore Robert Louis Stevenson thing. So we read Kidnapped, which was kind of okay. I struggled with Kidnapped because I like to do the voices, and it's all in Scotland, and it was like, dude, I can't do this. My Scottish accent is shit. But now we're doing my fucking pirate. Now that I've got some serious chops with the pirate voices.
You need some West Country in there as well with Treasure Island. You got to go from Bristol.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can do a bit of that too. Yeah, like Captain Skipper. But that book, man, it's like I've never read it before now, and you think of the sort of the film versions of it, which are all these kind of super Disneyfied, stage set Errol Flynn like kind of people prancing around in stripy pants with bandanas on and whatnot. But that book is fucking brutal. It is absolutely, it's absolutely brutal. Like, I don't know if he wrote it for kids, and I keep just imagining, like, desperate that the kind of Coen brothers would do a True Grit style remake of Treasure Island, just absolutely as kind of dark and brooding and brutal. Pirates. I want to do swearing that probably isn't allowed here, but they're not nice people.
Swear all you want, Jay.
No, I'm gonna slide over that one. But yeah, I was gonna really express myself in swearing there. But yeah, they're not nice people, and they don't come across as nice people. They just come across as scary, awful people, not to be emulated.
But just when he first arrives at the inn, and just the way the book portrays him, and as he arrives, and the way that he's just his presence there, it's genuinely upsetting. Like, these people are just fucking awful.
It's like a home invasion, but like
it's a brilliant book. And I think back then people didn't really write for kids. They just wrote stories, and it's like, it's like, there's pirates in this, kids will enjoy it, and it sort of becomes a children's story. But it's absolutely not.
They love it in the same way as they love, brutal old fairy tales. I'm just going to put one last thing. So a book that I just finished for myself was The Migration by Helen Marshall, which was amazing. Like, I've not read any of her work before, but had seen lots of people talking about her stuff, and I think it's the only novel that she's written. But it's a real kind of like a end of the world apocalypse kind of scenario, with some very strange body horror shit going on that is ultimately incredibly hopeful. Like, it's hope, everything collapsing and turning to shit, but there being some capacity for us to evolve beyond it. Yeah, very, very good book if you've not read it.
Yeah. Aaron, you're next.
I'm almost finished reading a bloody terrific book. It's called White Horse, and it's by Erica T. Worth.
Yep.
And I just wanted to make sure I get this correct. She is from Apache, Chickasaw, and Cherokee descent. This book is horror. It is about a kind of a young woman who inherits a bracelet that essentially evokes a kind of Native American grief Bigfoot that is following her in the wake of a central mystery around involving her mother. And this thing is creepy and wonderful, and I'm absolutely loving it. So there was that. I'm on the tail end of, I just finished a really great book called Gemini Rising by Justin Lutz, which was a very, very small novella, and people will love it. I'm super excited about reading John Bowden's new one, which is called Snarl, which is, I think, out this week. I'm the biggest John Bowden fan. I think John Bowden is one of our most unsung kind of voices in horror at the moment. And I am reading the most random thing, and it's here next to me. It's completely out of print, and it's called The Killing of the Unicorn by Peter Bogdanovich, who is a filmmaker. And this is his it is about the murder of Dorothy Stratton, the actress who was murdered, who was basically picked out of a Dairy Queen in Vancouver at the age of 18 by a real sleazeball. This is a true story, in the very early 80s, and within 12 months was in the Playboy Mansion and was Playgirl of the Year, and was graduated into film. And her partner and business partner was this incredibly toxic, abusive monster of a pimp, and she left him for Peter Bogdanovich, who directed The Last Picture Show, Paper Moon, incredible, brilliant films. And then she was murdered horrifically by the ex-partner. And Peter Bogdanovich, within a year and a half of her passing, wrote this novel, this nonfiction piece. And the reason that I bring it up is that I have a really kind of interesting relationship with true crime, books. I'm actually really not interested in facts. I don't find true crime very interesting for me personally. I'm really interested in kind of grief reconciliation pieces when it comes to true crimes. This is a really great example of somebody who is trying to bring someone back from the dead by honoring them, and is absolutely one track in trying to punish someone who isn't alive anymore, because the guy who killed him, it was a murder-suicide pact. And he's trying to write someone back to life, and it's incredibly loving, but but that doesn't happen. A very similar type of book is Who Killed My Daughter by Lois Duncan. Lois Duncan wrote I Know What You Did Last Summer. Incredible, junior teenage horror fiction through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And her daughter was murdered in a terrible crime. And she wrote a book where she basically is trying to justify why someone who she's putting together a defense as to why this particular person may have done it. And she's literally breaking into people's homes to try to gather up evidence. And you just want to reach inside the book and hug this poor woman as she kind of is slipping down a rabbit hole that is really not going to lead anywhere other than just to continuously hurting herself. And this book is like that too. I'm kind of fascinated by it because the facts don't matter. It's really about trying to love someone back to life, and you just can't do it. Yeah, The Killing of the Unicorn. Fascinating, flawed, but I'm so into it. That's what I'm reading at the moment. Random shit.
Awesome. And Anthony.
Okay, so I like, as anyone who's read any of my stuff will know, as I like to cross genres a lot, so I tend to read things from multiple genres simultaneously. So in terms of horror, I've got Joseph's book, which hopefully will cause me fewer anxiety attacks, but I'm still reading that one. I'm also reading Lonesome Dove, like the kind of quintessential American Western. I don't know why I picked it up. I love Westerns, I guess that's why I picked it up.
It's one of my favorite novels of all time, man. It
is fucking superb. Like I'm about halfway through, and the richness of the language and the character work and the sense of place and the kind of casual storytelling that seems almost half-assed, and then you sort of get a few chapters in, you go, oh, this is all sort of coming together. I understand this now. Just wonderful stuff. Really superb. Highly recommend. It's one of those books that, one of those Pulitzer Prize winning, you should probably read this before you die books. And if you find a lot of those overrated, this one isn't, I promise you.
There's also, sorry to interrupt, Anthony, but there's if you do audiobook, Lee Horsley read Lonesome Dove, and it's like a 34-hour audiobook or something like that. An outstanding job. So it's a brilliant way to have that story told to you, because the narration is superb. The character work is brilliant.
Yeah, anything by Larry McMurtry. True. Dove. I have become over the past 12 months obsessed with Larry McMurtry, and I read Lonesome Dove recently, and it blew my mind.
So good.
I love that you brought this up.
It entirely lives up to the hype. The other one I'm reading is She is the Darkness, which is the 6th or 7th book in the Black Company series by Glenn Cook, which is this kind of dark fantasy series set in a series of war-torn fantasy places, which is described by Steven Erikson as Vietnam on peyote. Like, it's fantasy Vietnam, so it's this weird mix of war-torn horror, but also kind of wizards and whatnot. And I've become vaguely obsessed with Glenn Cook, who's this multi-genre crossing author that pumps out these. Well, used to. I think he's sort of slowed down these days, but has pumped out series in multiple genres. And again, I love that. I love when writers can tackle multiple genres, like your Joe R. Lansdales and people like that. Just kind of they're across everything, and they can mix elements of each genre. That is really fascinating to me. And if I may break with the formula a little bit, up next I've got Tide of Stone by our own Kaaron Warren, which I cannot fucking wait to read, because I had a look at the first chapter and I was like, oh Jesus Christ, Kaaron. All right.
Yes.
I don't want to sound like a sucker, but I also have Dirty Heads ready next on my list. I've actually got signed copies from both of these guys, because I met them at a Supernova, and then there was another event we did for a Spec Fiction Festival. I'm sorry. And I just want to reiterate what you were talking about before, Brennan. The sense of community with this, I guess, very small family of Australian writers is really wonderful, because I'm just a weird, massive-headed, awkward dork. And to meet these kind of people who are sort of say, hey, come in, you're welcome in this club that I'm relatively new to, has been really wonderful and really kind of affirming of my choice to kind of, move into novels from screenplays and movies as well. So it's just a wonderful thing to see, and I thank you all for it. Alan as well, who basically organized half this stuff, is like the patriarch of this whole thing, and it's just wonderful. I thank you for it.
Yeah, he absolutely is. And now, Alan, you, sir.
Okay, so I'm reading. Well, so C.S. Humble is Seth Humble is an author. I was asked because Sallow. I'll get to the point of this in a minute. Why don't I start at the beginning? So Cemetery Dance published Sallow Bend. They also are publishing Seth Humble's like Weird Western series, and they asked me would I read for a blurb. So I'm currently reading book 3 in this trilogy. So the first one is The Massacre at Yellow Hill. The second one is a Red Winter in the West. And I'm currently reading the third one, which is called Light of a Black Star, which isn't out yet, but is coming out, I think, later this year. And it's brilliant. The first 2 are out, and the third one's coming out. It's basically, I mean, it starts off kind of like almost like you might expect a sort of horror western to start, and then it sort of gets more and more weird and kind of alternate history. I can't really say too much about it without giving too much away, but it involves all sort of creatures. It's got body horror, it's got cosmic horror, and it's all set against this really sort of richly realized Western background, with really cool, interesting characters and stuff like that. So I'm currently reading the third book in that series, which is due out later this year. So if you like a bit of weird Western action, The Massacre at Yellow Hill is the first one, which is well worth a read. And I've also got coming up next on the TBR, talking about supporting each other, I've got Emma After is sitting there, which is coming up, which is Anthony's book. I've got Joseph's collection is sitting on the TBR as well, ready to come up next. So yeah, these are always the ways that it goes. The support in this community is awesome, and we punch above our weight. There's so many great writers over here. You could honestly just spend all your time just reading the output of Australian writers and never get bored, and have a massive variety of cool stuff to read. So yeah, easily done.
Yeah, definitely agree. Candace, what are you currently reading? I can't talk.
What am I currently reading? Snarl is one we just mentioned. I just started that 2 nights ago. John Bowden reading that for a review for the website. I just finished the Karen Slaughter's new one after that night. I have about 97,000 more on my TBR list to read by November for the website, and yay! I'm reading everything by everybody, and then I just wrote down all the books that they just named to add to my TBR list because, well, I have to now.
It's not big enough.
It's not, and that's going to cut down on my 3.5-hour nap that I take every night.
Brandon, I want to save you for last. I'm
right.
I'm 60% through The Demon of Devil's Cavern. It's Brennan's book. I told him this. It's gonna be impossible for me to not sound biased because he's one of my best friends. But it's fucking good. It's my favorite book by him. And it comes out in 2024. It's a sequel to his Western Noose, and I don't know. I'm really impressed with it. Not to say my word means anything, but he's come a long ways, and he started off really good with his first book, Slattery Falls. But this is just another league. It's really, really well written.
Talking of good westerns and weird westerns, Noose was a great book.
Yeah, and Alan was kind enough to lend me some. Oh my gosh, I can't think of words. It's too late. Alan was kind enough to blurb it so that I could use his words to sell copies.
Well, I hope it worked. It was a good book. It's worth selling copies.
Thank you, sir.
I'm literally popping all these on my to-be read pile.
Yeah.
Brennan,
piece of paper here is going crazy with stuff I'm writing down.
Brennan, your turn, buddy.
Well, first of all, thank you for for more free advertisement. Yeah, no, I'm super proud of that book. I also would like to talk about John Bowden though, because as we mentioned, he is so underrated and humble, and everything he writes is just it's gorgeous. And Snarl is no exception. That book, you hear that the best endings, if you will, they're surprising yet inevitable. And I almost can't think of a better example than what he pulled off in that book. Really, really special book, and I hope a lot of people will check it out. I'm also reading Things Get Ugly by Joe R. Lansdale, crime stories. And I will read anything Joe puts out, but the variety in this one is absolutely mind-blowing. Like, you have two stories side by side, and like one is this anthropomorphic, almost like Smokey the Bear type character if he was a sex pest. And it's hilarious and it's brutal.
Sold.
But then like the very next story is this like deep dive inside the mind of like a mass shooter, and it's like the juxtaposition there is absolutely wild, but both are so unique and so well done, and you almost wouldn't even realize they were the same writer. But I mean, Joe is Joe. It's always gonna kind of have his stamp on it. And I also want to throw out there, I'm reading the Dead Take the A Train. It's Richard Kadri and Cassandra Caw.
Oh, and Cass Core.
Yeah, and it has that kind of like Cass's cosmic horror with Richard's gritty fantasy, but it's just this over caffeinated, like balls to the wall thrill ride. Like, it's the pacing is just absolutely wild, and the biggest thing is you can absolutely tell that they had a blast writing it. And I love when that comes through, when you pick up a book and you can just feel how much fun the author or authors in this case had putting it together. So that's what I've got. Patrick, back to you, sir.
Yeah, we're just going to do where can people follow you. So, Aaron, where can people follow you?
Gosh, what do we call Twitter now? I don't even know.
We call it Twitter.
We call it Twitter.
I call it Dirty X because like the is faded like distressed denim. So you can find me on Dirty X. Actually, don't Google me on Dirty X.
How does the porn star thing come to a full circle? That was unexpected.
It all comes together. Sorry, we don't. What was the question? Where do you find me? So
where can people watch you, follow you?
On Twitter at Aaron Dries. I have a TikTok that I use occasionally. That's actually become a really fun place to hang out. I'm on Threads. I'm on Instagram. I am still haunting the corridors of Facebook. You can hit me up via my website, or if you're in Canberra, come and say hi.
Awesome. Kaaron, where can people follow you?
I'm on the Dirty X Twitter and Blue Sky, hopping over there, but I've done not very much, and Insta. And of course, the three of us, Aaron and Joseph and I, have our podcast, Let the Cat In. I think that's a really good way to find all three of us and hear us do more of this blah-de-blaring. Well, yes, we may argue about sausage rolls and things like that, but we do a lot of interesting chatting with people as well. So I think that website is a good way to keep up with us all too.
That's great. Joseph, where can people follow you?
Okay, well, Kaaron beat me to it. Like, so the website, we're going plug hard for Let the Cat In.
Do it.
Is ltcipodcast.com. And there's loads of episodes talking to kind of cool people, but also us talking shit. In terms of me, my website is spooktapes.net. And I'm at Spooktapes at all the things where places have an app before them.
That's great. Anthony, how about you, buddy?
Yeah, I'm on the usual places. I think I'm Claw Talk on Dirty X. I'm Straya Book on there as well. Straya Book on Instagram, and I think just my name on Instagram as well. And also Facebook, because I'm old and I like writing big slabs of text. That's kind of my jam. Yeah, just the usual places. I shouldn't be too hard to find. Come and have a chat and we'll talk about stuff.
Alan.
Yeah, my website's always the best place to go. It's just alanbaxter.com.au. You can find links to everything else from there. I'm on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, fuck Elon. You'll find me on there just at Alan Baxter as well. But yeah, hit the contact page on my website, and that's everything you need is there. I've got a Substack newsletter and stuff as well, so I'm easily found if you just go to alanbaxter.com.au.
Candice.
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook as me or as Uncomfortably Dark. You can also get in touch with me through the Uncomfortably Dark website as well, and there's a contact form out there also. And I have a link tree floating around out there too, which will take you to absolutely all of my stuff. So,
Brennan.
BrennanLaFaro.com has all the links to the things. Typically, it's at Brennan LaFaro on almost everywhere but TikTok. I won't do it.
I want to see you dance. Come on, let's do some dances.
You do not, Aaron. I promise you.
I bet he does. He does.
I do.
You can follow me at PR McDonough on Instagram or Twitter. You can follow the show, Dead Headspace, on pretty much all the sites you would expect on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, if that's still a thing. I just wanted to thank. This was a long episode. Holy shit! So this is a good way to get back into it. The last episode, like I said in the beginning, was a panel episode, and this just felt like the other side of the world, like the Australian equivalent. Seriously, not kissing ass. This was just as much fun. So I appreciate your time, Kaaron, Aaron, Alan, Anthony, and Jay. I also appreciate your time there, Candice and Brennan. You listener, next episode 206 is with Karen Slaughter. That should be fun. As always, give many choices in podcasts. Thank you for picking us.